Okay, we are on page Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, page 13a. Let's go over yesterday's Mishnah and Gemara. Yesterday we learned that if a person was in the middle of reading the Torah and he started reading the portion of the Shema, does he fulfill the mitzvah or not? Does anyone remember? He's in the middle of reading the Torah and he happens to read the Shema part. Does he fulfill the mitzvah?
If he had the intent.
Rabbis or?
That's right. If he had the intent, the Mishnah said if he had the intent. Now let's jump to the Gemara part of that Mishnah. And how did the Gemara initially understand that? That if you need to have the intent, what does that prove? It proves a famous argument that is applicable in many areas. If mitzvahs need kavana, mitzvahs tzrichos kavana. So if here we say you need to have intent when you say the words of Shema, it implies that whenever we do a mitzvah, if you don't have the intent, you're actually not doing the mitzvah. So for example, if a person blows the shofar and he's blowing it in order to enjoy the sound, did he fulfill the mitzvah?
No.
So it sounds like he's not going to fulfill the mitzvah from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says if you read the Torah and you say the Shema paragraph, but you don't have in mind, you're not fulfilling the mitzvah. So the same thing would apply to the shofar. So what is the Gemara's answer, Yehuda?
Yeah. What about tzedakah? Tzedakah, you don't need to have the intent.
So we touched upon that yesterday. How does it work with tzedakah if you're specifically talking about the case where you dropped money and someone else found it, right?
Right.
And you didn't have in mind that the person should. So it could be that would be included in this, in this argument. Do mitzvahs need kavana or not? But the truth is that case of tzedakah is really worse, because in that case of tzedakah, your act, you didn't even really do an act of kindness of tzedakah. It just ended up mistakenly. In other words, here you blew the shofar. Here you said the Shema. There you dropped money. You didn't give money to tzedakah, you dropped it. Someone else ended up finding it. So I would think that that's even further indirect. It's a further step of indirect that maybe it would not necessarily be considered, a tzedakah mitzvah, unless there's some reason. I know that the statement in the Talmud is Hakadosh Baruch Hu kaveh lo schar. Let's take a look where it exactly says that. Where's the source? I know it's a Rashi, but it must be from the Talmud. So let's see. Kaveh lo schar.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
My parents always told me that if you do a good deed and if you talk about it, it's taking it away.
So
the whole world doesn't need to know about your good deed.
Right.
That's not really how
so your parents told you that. That is because they wanted you to do it for on a high level.
Right.
On a high level.
And
But
not
that
be
doesn't mean that
boastful.
you're not fulfilling the mitzvah at all. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that you didn't fulfill it. It means that they wanted you to they want you to fulfill the mitzvah on a higher level.
Okay.
They didn't want you to be a Baal Gaiva that's why
what?
they didn't want Baal Gaiva, to be proud of the fact that you did
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
So,
Well,
that overtakes the fact that you did the mitzvah. So
yeah.
they said to you, do the mitzvah. You don't need to talk about it. Hashem is
nobody
the one who's going to
know
give you the
about it,
schar.
Right.
Right.
I mean, I think it is not to
God-
be not to be boastful that
Right.
compromises the act.
Right, right. They always said God knows what the good things that you do.
And the
Right.
bad.
Rabbi, can I say something to you,
Yes.
Rabbi?
Yeah,
Yeah, I wanted to say, if you drop the coins and somebody found it, a needy person, maybe it was that God wanted this man to have some money, but there was nobody else around him. So
Uh-huh.
at least he knew that you dropped the money there. He pointed him to that place and he picked it up.
1 second. Let me find the source of this is the Sifri. The Sifri says in Parshas Kiseitse, it says, Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, how do you know, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, how do you know that if a person loses a sela, a coin, and a poor person finds it, and he supports himself, sustains himself from it, the pasuk considers it as if he ki'ilu zacha, as if he merited it. And the pasuk says, "La ger la yosem v'la'almana yihiyeh." It should go to the ger, to the stranger, to the orphan, to the widow. It should be. So, and you see from there that if a person didn't have in mind, and yet gets merit, and the Torah considers it that way. So a person who has in mind and does it for sure, how much more so? So we see from there that it's as if he gave it to the person. Now, Rashi says this on the pasuk Laman Yivarechacha, that in order that he should bless you, even though it came not through you, through your intent, so how much more so if a person has in mind. So you see from here, if a coin fell from your hand and a poor person found it, sustained himself, he gets blessed. Harehu misbarech aleh. He gets blessed for it. So it doesn't clearly say, if he's fulfilling the full-fledged mitzvah of tzedakah. It's not 100% clear. Now, there's a lot of commentaries. I see they discuss I'm just looking it up over here online. There's a lot of discussion about this.
Does that mean it's controversial?
Well, no, they want to understand this. How does this fit with the other rule that mitzvahs might need kavanah?
Right.
So I see one sefer says tzedakah is different because if you don't have in mind for Hashem, you're not doing anything. You took a lulav, you put on tefillin, but there's no benefit. But however, here by tzedakah, even without the intent, the poor person benefited. So that's one opinion. Now let's see what other people say. I'm just pulling this up now, so this is not. I wasn't really planning on discussing this, but we did touch upon it yesterday.
Right.
So maybe we'll try to get a little more clarity.
When you're finished, I have a question.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
So there is another opinion that also says you don't need kavanah for tzedakah, and because tzedakah is all about the person benefiting. A similar idea.
Rabbi, what do you think?
I don't.
As a person,
I can't argue with these rabbis.
Right,
I can argue with Rabbi Sachs, but I can't argue with the Talmud and the commentaries of the Talmud.
Right.
So 1 second. So we have a Ramban in Iran that seem to argue with this. This is one of the issues that they seem to deal with. Oh, so then they say my claim that there is, it's possible to say that maybe you're just getting rewarded, but you're not actually fulfilling the essence of the mitzvah. You're just getting a similar reward. So really tzedakah needs kavana, but nevertheless, even though you did it without the intent, you will get a reward. So that would be one way of explaining it. And they want to bring from the Shulchan Aruch, chapter 249. We'll have to take a look there.
Rabbi, what about Peah and Shikha for, it's the same idea. So if individual is carrying bundles and one falls, you're not allowed to pick it up. It's supposed to be left for the ani. So
Right.
you get this schar for whatever, but it's not because you didn't put it in his hands. That's equivalent to the second part that you just read. The first part is, yes, you get the schar mitzvah because you're leaving it to the ani, but but you don't get the schar in the sense of having given it to him personally.
Right. Interesting thought. Although I would argue, because I would say that maybe the mitzvah of peah in shikha, or especially shikha, is really the case. The good example that you're thinking is leket and shikha, because you're physically forgetting. You actually forgot it, so it's actually, you didn't think of it at all. It fell. But now that you are leaving it for the poor, this act of leaving it is intentionally being done to help the poor. So in other words, your mitzvah is the leaving it. It's not the fact that it dropped. It's the fact that you're leaving it for the poor and not taking it. So, to a certain extent, I see that more as an intentional mitzvah rather than
But if you're
at least in part.
carrying,
But this
you're
whole,
carrying
all
the
of
bundle
this,
and it
Well,
falls
just
out
one
of
second.
your hand.
What?
If you're carrying the bundle and it falls out of your hand, that's the equivalent of you dropping the money by accident.
Right,
and
except that
you
by
can't
dropping the
pick it
money
up.
by accident, you didn't know that you dropped it, so you didn't know to pick it up. Here, you see that it fell. You see that it fell out of your hand, the leket, the grain, or you see that the shikha, that you forgot a actual bundle. You see afterwards that you forgot it, and you decide that you are not going to go and retract it and pick it up. You're not going to go and gather it because of the mitzvah. So here you're actually intentionally doing the tzedakah. At least that's the way I see it. You know what I mean? There, you didn't know that you dropped it, so you had there's nothing. It's not like you intentionally did anything.
But this is all problematic, because if I have the money or I have the package, it was not my intent. I dropped it by mistake. Okay. And so the question is, I then lose out because maybe that money is irreplaceable to me. So how can we construe that it's a mitzvah when I didn't conscientiously give money or leave the money? And so what happens to the person who is, in some respects, the victim of the process? While there's a mitzvah involved, what does that say about the person who lost the money inadvertently?
You're differentiating between the case of losing money versus someone who mistakenly
well, even mistakenly, if they lost a package or whatever. So I guess the question is, I'm supposed to be responsible for my money. I understand that. Let's say I have a hole in my pocket and the money falls out. Okay. And I'm in shul, and, or somebody picks it up. So that then is construed as a mitzvah because theoretically, you're helping somebody who is poor, who is destitute or whatever. But by the fact that I have the money and I inadvertently lost it, then I then become an indirect victim of the process is what I'm trying to understand, okay?
Uh-huh.
But we're
How does
all-
that work then?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But Rabbi, aren't we told that that you know Hashem gives us money, a portion of that money really isn't ours. It
Uh-huh.
belongs to the poor.
Robert,
So-
I think Ezra's answering. You're trying to answer your question.
Not necessarily. Let's say that I do my tithing, I give tzedakah, and I still have money in my pocket, okay? And it falls out or whatever. So I'm just for, let's say for argumentation's sake, how is the logic then postured within this activity? That's all I'm asking. Is it wrong to ask that question? I don't know.
No, it's not wrong, but
How do you then justify that if the money is dropped, and it doesn't say whether it's conscientiously dropped or what, where was it dropped? I mean, if it's dropped in shul, then you don't pick up money in shul or on Yantiv, okay? So where in the process
you wouldn't be
does
carrying
some
money anyway.
right, does the well, you may not remember that you have it, but where is the reconciliation of that process, if there is one? I don't
Right.
know.
Well, Robert, I think, that's, I think the answer to that question is sort of, it's sort of the question of why does, bad things happen, like you lost money, why did you deserve it? It's nice that guy found it. But the point is that we sometimes are very happy that, there, when something like that happens, you hope that a poor man found it. You're actually happy. Wow, that's great, because I was meant to lose this and this amount of money. And at least it didn't have to go to doctor bills, or it didn't have to go to some Ganav who I have to bring my car to fix.
Right.
You know,
you
or
had
some
that
other
experience
Ganav
also.
who I have to
Okay.
deal with.
All right.
And at least it's at least it fell in shul, and hopefully someone who deserved it, needed it. So you sort of, we all know that we owe Hashem more than we give Hashem. And no one gives as much. I've spoken to accountants, and they always tell me, they say, you think people give as much as they can. It's
not the fact. It's
very
not the
rare
fact.
to find, that people are really giving, as much as they can. And the point is that we owe Hashem a lot more than we do. So the fact that it was lost just meant that you really should have given more money to tzedakah. And even though you gave your 10th, but you should have given 20%. You should have given even more than that. It's interesting. The Alter Rebbe says in the Tanya, he says, there is a law that's brought down that a person is not supposed to give more than 20% to charity. There is such a law.
Oh, okay.
And the question is, so, what happens when a person, has sins that they want to atone for? And one of the ways of atoning for sins, in addition to repenting, is to become more, to appease Hashem, would be like bringing sacrifices in the time of the temple, fasting. And a person nowadays, to fast is very hard. So if you give charity the amount of money that you normally pay for a meal for a day of meals, that would possibly be considered like a fasting for that day. So let's say a person wanted to fast 84 fasts because he did a certain sin that's considered a sin of 84 fasts, is supposed to be an atonement for that sin. There are certain sins it gives numbers for how many fasts. And so a person wants to give 84, let's say, times $30. He eats $30 worth, a day of food. So he wants to give 18 times 30, but the problem is he already gave his 20% to charity.
Right.
Is he allowed to give any more?
So no.
He already gave his 20%, and now he wants to atone for his sins. For 84 fast, and I can't. I got to give 30 times 84. Or whatever. So he's got to give. It's a lot. So what does he do? So the Alter Rebbe says something interesting. He says, would you be allowed to buy medicine? Let's say you needed to buy $1,000 medicine. Would you be allowed to buy it? you already gave your meiser, your tchemesh, you gave your 20% to charity. Are you allowed to buy medicine to stay well, to stay healthy? Of course you're allowed to buy medicine, right? So he said, this is spiritual medicine. Spiritual medicine is no worse than physical medicine. So you're right, you're not supposed to give more than 20% to charity. But for medicine purposes, you're allowed to. And therefore, even though you gave your 20% already to charity, the extra money you're giving, a few $1,000s to charity now as a medicine purpose to heal your soul, healing the soul is no worse than healing the body. So therefore, you're allowed to give more than 20%. So don't worry, if you give a little more than 20%, it's not so bad. It'll heal some of those sins of the past and so on. So basically, the Alter Rebbe says it's fine. It's a very interesting, logic that he uses. It's no worse than healing the soul is no worse than healing the body. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say everything in life is bashed.
Right.
So if you lost something, you were supposed to lose it one way or another.
Right.
If you lost it and somebody else gains from it, you should get some schut for it.
Right.
Because if you lost big money, you would look for it. You would go back, look for it, and try to retrieve it.
Right.
But you're talking about losing a coin. Let's say if you loses even a few dollars, if it's not something that hurts you, somebody else benefits from it, you need to get credit for it.
Right. Well, I think the point of this statement in the Talmud in the Sifri is a tremendous statement. And Rashi brings it down that you lost it. So you would think that you're getting like a punishment only because you should have given more charity. And Hashem says, don't worry. This time you're actually getting a mitzvah for it. You're actually getting a reward. You'll get a reward for it. So this time I'm taking it. You owed it to charity. I'm taking it, but don't feel so bad. Next time it's going to go to the car mechanic who's going to rip you off $1,000, and he's going to cut your timing belt 3/4 of the way so that you'll have to come back to him 3 weeks later and get a new timing belt. And he's going to rub out your tires a little so that you'll have to come back in a month to get new tires. And then he's going to rub out the brake pads and and mess up and cut something else. And so this time that you lost it and someone found it goes to a poor person. It's actually, you're lucky. You're actually getting a reward for this time. But just make sure to give more charity next time, because otherwise it'll end up, if you don't, it's going to end up going to some other
right.
cause.
Maybe
you
the analogy.
You get a ticket from you'll end up getting caught for speeding and this.
Maybe the analogy is if you overpay your credit card bill, you get the extra money as a credit for next time.
Right. Okay. Anyway, it's an interesting thought. So I thank you for bringing this up, Yehuda, again. I think it is a long discussion, and it's something that I would like to look into. But I think the conclusion is that mitzvahs of tzedakah is either a mitzvah that doesn't need kavana, and that's one way of looking at it, or the mitzvah of tzedakah you actually are not fulfilling, and you are just getting a reward, but you're not actually fulfilling the mitzvah of tzedakah. Let me just read one thing here. He says, yeah, so that's what it seems like. I'll have to look into this and see how they conclude, how to go through all the details. But that's that would be an answer to the question that tzedakah might be different. Okay, so let's go back to what we were talking about. So we were in the middle of discussing this fact that it seems from the Mishnah that you need kavana, and the Gemara answers that no, we're talking about a guy who's a sofer, and he's checking the Torah and he's reading the words, and the way Rashi says it, he's checking if there's any mistakes, and he's not exactly having in mind to read the words. He's not having in mind to read the words, but he's reading them, but he's not reading them with the intention to read them. He's reading them, just happens they're coming out of his mouth. So, or he's not definitely intending to read them. Therefore, the Mishnah says, no, you have to have in mind to actually read them. Not necessarily to do the mitzvah, just to make sure that you're having in mind to read them. Tosfos learned that you have to make sure to pronounce them properly, because when you're reading in order to check a Sefer Torah, you're pronouncing the words wrong often because the letters might be different. That was the way Tosfos learned. Now, there is another explanation from Rabbeinu Yoina that I didn't mention yesterday, and that is that he's reading it, but he's not even intending to say the words, but the words are, while he's reading it, the words are sort of undertone, they're coming out of his mouth. So they're a little different than Rashi. The way Rashi learned was that he is not intending, he's saying the words, but he's not intending to. He's saying them, but not intending to do, Rashi says, what does Rashi say? He's reading Lahagia, the Sefer, he's reading to fix if there's any mistake, but he's not having intention to read it. And Rabbeinu Yoina says, what do you need intention? If you're saying the words, then for sure it's fine. You know what? Let me take a look at Rabbeinu Yoina. Rabbeinu Yoina here. He's not having in mind to read it. He's having in mind to fix the words. In other words, why is he reading it? Not because he wants to read it. He's reading it in order to fix. And that's a problem. So he has to have in mind, I'm reading it for the sake of reading. That's the way Rashi's learning. And then he brings Tosfos over here, which we explained. So he says another explanation. That when you sometimes compare two books, the words just happen, while you're looking at them, in order to fix one from the other one, you sometimes mention a word. You say it, sometimes it comes out of your mouth. So you're not even having in mind to say the word. So therefore it says, no, you need to actually have in mind that you're saying each word.
Rabbi, I think
so that's the
they
difference.
are
Okay, it's a little,
about
it's
the
slight, very
purpose.
slight. Yes, Ben.
I think they are arguing about the purpose for saying the word. What's your purpose that you're saying the word? If you're saying it for just comparison reasons, it's not as important as saying it with kavana that you mean to say it for another purpose.
Well, I would say what's called saying. What's called saying. If words come out of your mouth because you're looking at a book, and every so often, like you're looking at a book and you happen to say a word, is that called reading? Or does that just like it happened to be? You were looking at it for a little while. Like sometimes you're looking on the billboard signs while you're driving. So you like say a word because you read it on the billboard. If it comes out of your mouth, is that called saying? You didn't really have in mind to say it. It's sort of like, you were looking at it for 3 seconds. So somehow some mishigas
Right.
came in your head that you said the
Purpose
word.
is different.
I don't know if it's different. That's one way of, that's the way Rabbeinu Yonah seems to understand it, that you have to make sure that you're not just doing that. You have to actually have in mind that you're going to say the words. It should come through your seichel, not through just having to be said. Now, Rashi seems to have learned a little differently. The easiest explanation is Taisvus' explanation. They have to make sure to say the right vowels. And, that's the easiest way to understand it. But Rashi's explanation is a little different. You're definitely saying all the words, but your intent, you're doing it in order to fix. You're not doing it to recite words. Your intent is wrong. And Rashi says that there you need to have the intent to say words. It's not to, if your goal is only to fix, that's not good enough. Now, do you need the mitzvah intent? No, maybe. Maybe you don't need the mitzvah intent. That's what the Gemara is saying. We don't know if you need the mitzvah intent. That's another discussion. Here we're talking about you got to make sure you're saying the words properly. And the way Rashi says, you have to make sure you're having in mind to read it for the sake of reading. Taisa says you have to make sure you're saying the right vowels. And the Rabbeinu Yonah says you have to make sure you're saying it with not just it's coming out of your mouth, but you're actually having in mind to say it. So those are the 3 explanations and the different, the way of understanding this Gemara, that you make sure to actually say the words. Now, the next piece of the Mishnah was a little more confusing, and this was when you're allowed to interrupt. And the Mishnah had 2 opinions. We have Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, and we're talking about in the middle of a pasuk even. Are you allowed to interrupt in the middle of a pasuk? And the answer is yes. Even in the middle of a pasuk, there are cases where you are allowed to interrupt, and there are more cases where you can interrupt in between the chapters. So in between chapters is much more lenient, and in the middle of a chapter, and even in the middle of a verse, they have the same law. In the middle of a chapter, in the middle of a verse, there are cases where you could interrupt. So let's go according to Reb Meir. Reb Meir's opinion is, when are you allowed to interrupt? In between chapters. In between chapters, you're allowed to interrupt, according to Reb Meir, mipnei hakavod, for honor. Someone who you want to honor, someone who's more knowledgeable than you, is walking by and looking at you, and you want to honor him. And so in that case, you are allowed to be shoyel, say shalom aleichem, mipnei hakavod. And you could also answer, if he says shalom aleichem to you, you could answer him aleichem shalom. And now what happens if you're in the middle of a pasuk or in the middle of a chapter? So in that case, you're not supposed to answer a person who you honor, but you are supposed to, or ask a person who you honor. You can ask a person who you have to fear, and that is mipnei hayira, like a parent, a rebbe. That would be to be shoyel mipnei hayira. That would, and you could answer him if he says shalom aleichem to you. You could answer him. This is Reb Meir's opinion. Now Reb Yehuda says that he adds a little leniency. What is his leniency? Reb Yehuda's leniency is that when you answer, you're always one step easier to answer than to greet. The answering to a greeting is a little more lenient. And that's why he says that if you are in the middle of a verse, you can greet someone only that you have to fear, but you are allowed to answer someone, even someone who you have to honor. And in between chapters, you could greet someone who you have to honor, but you're allowed to answer anyone. Anyone comes and says Shalom Aleichem to you, you could answer them. So that is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. And then the Mishnah said that there are different ends of paragraphs. So does anyone want to tell us where the paragraphs end in the Shema, or the Brochos of the Shema? The Mishnah said where each paragraph is, what ends each paragraph. Anyone want to tell me? So between Shema and Vahayim Shemaya it was one end of paragraph. Okay. Okay, that's another one.
And then Vayomer le'emet v'yatziv.
Okay, which is an argument. There's an argument if that's considered, should you interrupt there or not?
Yeah.
Okay, and then we had before that, we had the case of in between the first bracha and the second bracha, and in between the second bracha and the Shema. These are all in between paragraphs. So you have between the first blessing and the second blessing, which means after you say Yoitzer HaMa'oros and you're starting Ava Rabba or Abba Solam, that in between there, that's an in between. And then between Habaycher B'Yama Yisrael B'Yahava and the Shema is another place in between paragraphs. And then you have the in between the paragraphs of the Shema. Then the Gemara jumped to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha's statement, why is Shema before Vahaya Im Shemaya? And what is the reason? Why is it before Vahaya Im Shemaya?
It's first of all, you have to honor the Malchut, and then the second is the mitzvot.
So it's accepting the yoke of Malchut. It's not. It's accepting the yoke of Hashem's kingship, and then it's accepting the yoke of mitzvahs. Now, let me ask you a question. Why doesn't the Gemara just say, or the Mishnah should just say, the reason why Shema is before Vahayim Shemaya is because Shema is in Parshas Va'eschanan, and Vahayim Shemaya is in Parshas Ekev. So of course it has to be before. It comes in the portion that's before it.
Well, you can always give Rashi's response, which
What is that?
There's no before or after in the Torah.
Ein muktam u'mu'uchar b'Torah, which means that the order in the Torah is sometimes you have things that are after, are really that happened after or before, and there's no real order. In other words, there is an order. Everything is, you have to be dirish why this is before that and why it's, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it took place before it. So ein muktam u'mu'uchar b'Torah is good, but the question is that under normal circumstances, we do try to follow the normal order of the Torah. Ein muktam u'mu'uchar b'Torah does not mean that we shouldn't follow it at all. It means that it doesn't have to be this order. So the question is, what would the reason be that Vahayim Shemaya should be first? Why would you think Vahayim Shemaya should be first if it comes after? Is there a different reason that's overriding? So again, you're right that you don't necessarily have to do it in this order, but that would be the norm. That would be the initial plan, would be to do it in this order. The Torah put it in this order, and that would be the way we should do it. So what would be a reason why we would think the opposite, that Vahayim Shemaya should be before Shema?
Well, one reason, Rabbi, might be because the third paragraph, which is speaking about tzitzis, is also before the two other ones, and that doesn't come first in the Torah. It falls in Bamidbar instead of Devarim. So if it was.
So yeah. Again, you're hitting on a good point, and that is similar to what Ezra was saying, that there's obviously since where Vayomer is not before Shema, so that proves that that even though in the Torah it comes before, it proves that you don't have to do it in order. True. True. So Vayomer is going to be after, for whatever reason. We're not going to follow the official order, but that means that as long as there's some reason, as long as there's something that you definitely can push it afterwards. It doesn't have to be in order. But the question is, what would the reason be to switch the order for V'Sheman V'Hayim Shemaya? In other words, there has to be a reason. You're saying that you see it's not a necessity to put it in the order. There are exceptions, and that's right, and that's sort of what Ezra was saying, that Ein Mukta Mucha B'Torah, that doesn't have to be in this order. And both of you are correct. The question is, and Vayomer proves it. Vayomer, the fact that Vayomer is not said before, really in the Torah, the Vayomer paragraph, the third paragraph of the Shema. Again, let me make it clear, because some of us are not so familiar with the Shema. The Shema has 3 paragraphs. There's Shema, there's V'Hayim Shemaya, and Vayomer. Now, in the Torah, the order goes Vayomer, Shema, V'Hayim Shemaya. That's the order in the Torah. Vayomer is in the book of Numbers, Shema and V'Hayim Shemaya are both in the book of Deuteronomy, and so it should be Vayomer, Shema, V'Hayim Shemaya. These are the 3, the order in the Torah. Now, we don't read it that way. We read it, the Shema, V'Hayim Shemaya, those 2, we read it in the right order in a certain sense. Those 2 are in the right order, but the initial paragraph, Vayomer, which should have been before, we put all the way at the end. So we put the first one last, and the other 2 are in the right order. So the question is there a reason to try to put things in order? Should we try to put it in the order of the Torah? Vayomer obviously shows that it doesn't have to be that way. So the Tosfos is not here, but there's a Tosfos on page 14, and he says that there's a reason why the Mishnah thought that maybe V'Hayim Shemaya should come first. Ben, do you want to say a reason?
Yeah, I want to say, though, that I think that Shema is the main thing here, because all 3 of them together are called the Shema prayers. So Shema should be the first one, I think.
Okay, but I'm
Vayomer
trying to find
should
out.
be the last.
I'm trying to find out why is V'Hayim Shemaya should be first.
Well,
Why is the Gemara
V'Hayim
thinking that, the
Shema-
Mishnah thinking that V'Hayim Shemaya maybe has a reason to go before Shema, if number 1, Shema is in the order of the Torah, Shema is first, and there's no reason not to. And you're even adding to it. You're saying that Shema is like more general.
The main thing here is the Shema.
The Shema,
So
that's
why
the
they
main
put it
thing.
first.
So the question is, so why is the Gemara thinking that V'Hayim Shemaya should be first? Why is the Mishnah thinking that? So Tosfos gives an answer. Yes.
Oh, I had an idea, which was the first paragraph of Shema is telling the general concept. This is the rule. This is the main rules. The second paragraph of Shema is just a repetition, and it adds, not only do you do this, but if you don't do it, be careful you don't do it, because if you don't do it, this is what's going to happen. So there's like a qualifier, which makes it emphasizes and makes stronger what was brought out in the first paragraph, which is only the positive stuff. And now it's bringing out not only the positive stuff, but even the negative stuff. You got to watch out. Just be careful you don't do this. And then the third paragraph finally gives you a recommendation of how not to do it, looking at the tzitzis. And that's the solution.
Right. So your point is that there's reason to say maybe the second paragraph should be first, because it carries with it the negative, powerful statements.
I'm saying the negative, the second paragraph should be second, because the first paragraph is the introductory paragraph, which tells you all the main things. The second paragraph repeats those and adds a warning.
I understand. I understand what you were saying, but I think what I'm looking for is a reason why the second paragraph should be first, and the Mishnah says no. But really, you would think that maybe it should be first. So I'm trying to put into your words, like maybe that would also be a reason why it could go first, because it's a little more powerful, because it has the negative and the positive. So maybe it's more of a. So I think that's an interesting explanation. If you know,
actually, I think I
know
was
you didn't mean that.
Yeah, I was mistaken in trying to emphasize why the second paragraph should be second.
Right. Right now, I'm looking for why the Mishnah in its thought process. Again, we're trying to figure out the thought process of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is saying, why is Shema before Vayim Shemayim? Meaning maybe Shema should be first. So we're delving deep into the Mishnah and trying to figure out why would Vayim Shemayim maybe be better to be first. So Tosfos asks this question. He says because Vayim Shemaya is Belashon Rabim. It's the plural. It's talking to everyone. And the Ahavta is in the singular. Ukshartem oisam loisal yedechem is the plural, right? And in Shema, and the Ahavta, it's ukshartem loisal yodecha, on your hand. And so in the Vayim Shemaya, it's in the plural. And because it's in the plural, therefore there's a thought that would carry more of a I guess a unity or a more of a general statement to everyone, and therefore there's a thought that it would go first. And the Mishnah says, nope, Shema goes first because it's Mekabel Oil Malchus Shemayim first, and then you have oil mitzvahs. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. And then there's one last point in the Mishnah that says V'hayim Shemaya comes before Vayomer, because Vayim Shemaya is Bayoim and Balayla. Vayomer is only Bayoim, and that's referring to the mitzvah of tzitzis. Bayoim means it's a mitzvah of the day, and the mitzvah of tzitzis is a mitzvah of the day.
What answer to it.
What?
I say that one has a simple answer to it. If one is told twice a day and one only once, you don't want to have to skip the one at night. But you don't want to skip Vayomer at night. So if it's at the end, we only say it once, and the other one we say twice a day, without skipping anything.
So you're thinking that the Mishnah is saying that you don't even have to say it at night.
Vayomer you only say in the morning. So in the evening, you don't want to skip it and go to the next one, which you moved,
But it's in the Ma'ariv service, the Vayomer.
Yeah, but they say you don't say. Wait a minute. Vayayim Shamon. Yeah, Vayayim Shamon is both the day and the night.
Right, and the Vayomer is said. We do say it.
Only in daytime.
No, we say it at night. It's in the Ma'ariv service.
Okay, but it says here in the Gemara that Eino noheg ela bayom bilvad.
Right. So what does that mean? Eino noheg.
You're not used to saying it only once a day.
Well, the simple meaning is that the mitzvah of tzitzis that's in it is only by day.
Okay.
The
so
mitzvah of tzitzis.
Skip it at night.
What? And since you don't wear tzitzis at night,
in order for you not to have to skip it at night, which is not nice to skip something. So if it's at the end,
it doesn't mean you're not going to
it.
recite it. It just means that the mitzvah, the main mitzvah of tzitzis, the main paragraph is about tzitzis, and tzitzis is not part of the mitzvah of Shema, and therefore Vayim Shemaya carries with it a more of a importance of the fact that it's day and night.
Right.
So therefore it overrides and it comes first. Now there is a good question here, and that is that what about mentioning the Exodus from Egypt? That you have a mitzvah to mention the Exodus from Egypt, and that applies at night, as we saw in previous, in the previous Mishnah, that you have a mitzvah so there is a mitzvah to say it. So along the lines of what you're saying, Ben, is that you're asking a question really, that we do say it at night, and at night there is a mitzvah to mention the Exodus from Egypt. And so, so really it does have a mitzvah in it that does apply day and night. So there is a sefer that does discuss this, and I maybe we'll talk about it more tomorrow. It is asked. It is a question that is asked, and it is a good question. Okay, we're gonna continue. We started the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis learned. So that's where we're gonna start again from that point. It is about 10 lines up from the bottom of the page. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis learned in a brisa. The rabbis learned Kriyas Shema Kichsava. Kriyas Shema has to be the way it's written, which means it has to be in Hebrew. Divrei Rebbe, these are the words of Rebbe. And the rabbis say, in any language, my time of the Rebbe, what is the reason of Rebbe? Why is Rebbe say that it has to be in Hebrew? Amar Kra, because the verse says Vahayu, and it should be, which means Bahavayason Yehu. It has to be the way it is. Vahayu, and it should be this way. Means don't switch it. Don't translate the words into something else. It has to be this way. It says Vahayu advarim ha'ela. These words, it should be these words. Rabbanon my time mayu. So why do the rabbis say you could do it in any language? Amar Kra Shema. The verse says Shema, which means b'chol lashon she'ata shemeya. In any language that you understand, that is considered good enough. That would be okay. It's interesting that the word Shema has two meanings. It could mean hear. It could also mean understand. And the way our Gemara is learning it means understand. We know that also from Naaseh v'nishma. Naaseh v'nishma means we will do, and we will understand. Nishma, Shema. So it has that meaning to it of understand. So the pasuk says Shema, which the rabbis understand, translate to mean that any language that you understand, that's good enough to say the prayer, the Shema prayer. Now, the problem is, so what of each of these rabbis? They each have a proof. One says from the word Vahayu. In that paragraph, it says Vahayu. And the other one says, in that paragraph, it says Shema, the first word of the paragraph. And so therefore, each one has a source. The problem is, what does each one do with the other person's source? It's very nice you have a source, but what do you do with the other person's source? So the Gemara now goes back and forth. Ula Rebbe Nami Haksiv Shema. What does Rebbe do? It says Shema, which means hear, O Israel, however you hear it, however you understand it, in any language, Shema. You should be able to hear it. Should be in any language. So what does Rebbe do with that? The Gemara answers, Hahumi boile hashmea la'aznacha mashata moitzi mipicha. On that, it says you should listen, you should hear it should be heard to your ears what you are saying.
Out of your mouth.
What you are saying, you should be able to hear. Now, I should mention that this is going to be discussed more at length on page 15. So we really, in order to go more deep, and I know we wanted to discuss a person who's deaf, we're going to be discussing this more on page 15. So we're going to, push off the discussion about this until then. Now, so this is Rebbe's explanation that you want to know what I do with the word Shema? I use it for something else. I use it that you have to hear what you are saying. Rabbanan Savri Lahu. What do the rabbis hold? Commanda Amar Loi Hishmiya La'ozna Yatza. Now, what do the rabbis do? How do the rabbis know that law? So now we got to go back to the rabbis. What do you do with the law that Rebbe says you have to hear it? The rabbis hold you don't have to hear it. If you didn't hear it, you have fulfilled your mitzvah. Now, so what do the rabbis do with the word Vahayu, which implies that it has to be this way and no other way? Rabbanan, Nami Haksiv Vahayu. It says Vahayu, it should be this way. And you should say it in this way, the Shema, in Hebrew. So the Gemara answers, Hahumi boy lahu shalayikra lamafreya. That is needed to tell you that you're not allowed to go backwards. That it can't be, you can't read it in a way that's limafreya, that's retroactive. that goes from the later letters or verses and goes backwards. And that's why it's Vahayu, it has to be this way. Now, we learned in the Mishnah, and I gave a little proof that you can see from the Mishnah that you could switch around the paragraphs. Even though, of course, there is a certain order the paragraph should be in, but if you switched around the order of the paragraphs, you still fulfill the mitzvah. And we saw that in the Mishnah, that if the person is reading the Torah, he's going to fulfill the mitzvah of reading the Torah, even though he's obviously doing the portion that's third, he's going to be doing it first, because you first come to the third portion, which is earlier in the Torah, and then you come to the first portion and the second portion. That's the way it is written in the Torah. So we see from the Mishnah that even if you messed up in the order, you did the last one first, that's okay, because that's a whole paragraph. But here we're talking about within a paragraph. If you read it limafreya backwards, that is a problem. And the Rashi learns the mafreya means letters. You do each, not letters, words. Each word you do backwards. So, for example, it's read mezuzos beisecha uvisha arecha. That's the end words of the first paragraph. So what happens if you did them in the opposite order? Uvisha arecha, beisecha, mezuzos. So that would be going backwards. That's the way Rashi learns. But the other commentaries mention that it's even verses. So lo yikra lemafreya. Now, that is the source of the rabbis, what they use with the verse Vahayu to teach us. The Rebbe, so what does Rebbe do? How does he know that you're not allowed to read it backwards? How does he know that? Nafgale midvarim hadvarim. He takes it from the fact that it says Vahayu hadvarim, and it could have just said dvarim. So the Gemara says he learns it from midvarim hadvarim, from the fact that it should have said dvarim and it says hadvarim. So the extra letter hey, it should say Vahayu dvarim ha'ela, and it says hadvarim, these words, meaning in this order. And it should, in these words, in this order, Vahayu Rabbanan, and the rabbis say that's not a good proof. Rabbanan dvarim hadvarim loy darshi, they don't darshan it from there. They don't see that as a good source, and therefore the rabbis do not learn it from dvarim, from the word hadvarim. Instead, they learn it from Vahayu, and therefore they do not use Vahayu to teach you that it has to be Hebrew, because they use the word Vahayu to teach you that it can't be backwards, it can't be lamafreya, retroactive, and therefore they end up using the word Shema to teach you that it's b'chol lashon, in any language. The Gemara now asks, if Rebbe needs to a source to tell you that Shema has to be in Hebrew, what does that say about the whole Torah? Does that mean that the entire Torah you could read in English, and only this word, this portion, the Shema, where it says Vahayu, this portion has to be Hebrew? What does that say about the other portions of the Torah? The other portions you could read in English or in another language? And let's take the rabbis. The rabbis say Shema, you're allowed to say in all languages. What does that say about the rest of the Torah? The rest of the Torah, does that mean the rest of the Torah you have to say specifically in Hebrew? Only Shema, because it's specifically mentioning about the Shema, that Shema you could say in all languages. So the Gemara now has to break apart, why are we here going to be understanding that Shema needs a special teaching for either obligating everyone to say it in Hebrew, or allowing everyone to say it in any language? And why would this be different than any of the other laws of the Torah, or and is it different than all the other laws of the Torah? And that's what the Gemara now is about to do. So the Gemara says, Lememra, is this to say the Sava Rebbe, that Rebbe holds the Chol HaTorah Kula, the whole Torah, b'chol lashon nemra, in all languages it could be said, and only here it has to be specifically in Hebrew. The isal kedaitoch b'lashon hakodesh nemra, because if you are going to say that the entire Torah could be said in that the entire Torah needs to be said in Hebrew, v'hayu the cause of Rahman alamali, why would this Shema paragraph need the word v'hayu to tell you that if the whole Torah is automatically that way, that the whole Torah needs to be all in Hebrew? So the Gemara answers, itzrich, it is needed here, mishum d'chsiv Shema, because it says Shema, which implies you could say it in any language that you understand. Therefore, Rebbe says, no, but it specifically has to say v'hayu here, because you might have learned the wrong thing, like the rabbis learned, that Shema means any language. Since it says Shema, which might mean any language, therefore it needs to specifically say v'hayu to tell you here is no different than the whole Torah, and here also needs to be in Hebrew, just like the rest of the Torah needs to be in Hebrew. So we're using the source of the other opinion to be a reason why here specifically Rebbe needs to use his source, even though it's no different than the rest of the Torah. But the fact is, you have the other source of the other opinion, and therefore he needs to specifically emphasize, the Torah needs specifically to emphasize that here is no different than the rest of the Torah. So therefore you can't prove anything from the fact that here we're saying specifically it's Hebrew, doesn't mean anything that the rest of the Torah could be other languages, because here we specifically need to say Hebrew because you have reason to understand that it could be in any language. And then we're going to say the same thing about the rabbis, but my time is up. So I'm going to call it a day. Everyone have a wonderful day. We'll see you later.